Okay, back to YouTube.
All right, guys. So, as I said in the last video, okay, we're going to take a pause. We went over a lot of muscles, but we're going to keep rolling here. All right, we're going to be tough, have a positive attitude about all this stuff, and keep rolling with the punches. All right, so let's keep doing that. Let's roll with the punches. So, now we're going to move on a little bit more distal in the upper extremity to talk about the muscles that move the wrist and hand, okay? And I challenge you when you look at this one is heavily dependent on the function, okay? When you're looking at the names of these muscles, it's heavily dependent on what the function of the muscles are, okay? So, for example, the first one here we're going to talk about is the flexor carpi radialis, okay? And once again, remember, every muscle, okay, either in the name has the shape of it, has the location, or has the action of it. Almost every single one of these muscles that move the wrist and hand have the action of what it does, okay? Very similar to what the erector spinae is, okay? Or levator scapulae, what we see here. So, flexor carpi radialis, okay? So, it is the muscle that flexes the wrist, hence flexor carpi. Carpi referring to the wrist, like carpal tunnel syndrome. So, the muscle that flexes the wrist, okay? And it runs on the radial side, okay? And it does a special action if it runs on the radial side called radial flexion, okay? I learned it as radial deviation, okay? So the way that you do radial deviation is this. Let's see if we can show it on here. I'm actually trying to think of a way I would describe that, and it's actually a little bit tougher than... Let's see, pronator teres, there we go. Wrist abduction. So it's also called wrist abduction, but it's called here radial flexion or radial deviation, okay? All three of those terms are interchangeable. So radial or wrist abduction here is what you can see. So it's if you're in the anatomical position, if you're moving your thumb further away from the midline of the body, okay? So as if you're doing one part of a wave, like waving with your hand, okay? So that's wrist abduction here, okay? Wrist flexion, as we know, remember flexion forward, okay? What you're going to see is you're going to be curling that wrist upwards, okay? Flexion forward. So let's see if I can switch this guy over here. So anatomical position. We can see the wrist, flexion forward, going upwards in that direction, all right? Flexor carpi radialis. It is the muscle that flexes the wrist and also does radial flexion, okay? Perfect. All right, let's stop with this view. Let's get out, go back. And then we have another one here called the flexor carpi ulnaris, okay? So very similar, once again, flexor carpi, so it is a muscle that flexes the wrist, all right? But now it runs on the ulnar side of the wrist, okay? So versus the flexor carpi radialis running on the radial side, as we can see here, it runs over towards the radius, which is this bone here. The flexor carpi ulnaris, on the contrary, is going to be the muscle that runs, okay, on the ulnar side. All right, we know the ulna is right here, and that flexor carpi ulnaris runs on the ulnar side. You can see that very well distinguished on this view here. Flexor carpi radialis goes to the radial side. Flexor carpi ulnaris runs on the ulnar side. So we know it's going to flex the wrist, but what is wrist adduction or ulnar flexion or ulnar deviation? It is the opposite of wrist abduction and radial deviation. This time, you're bringing the pinky closer towards the midline, so it's the opposite of the wave, okay? So remember, when you're waving at somebody, you're doing both radial and ulnar flexion, or you're moving in radial flexion when, let's say, for example, you're moving your thumb closer towards the midline, and ulnar flexion when it's going closer towards the midline, okay? So they both have the same function here with flexing the wrist, but depending on if it's either radialis or ulnaris, it'll determine which one is doing radial flexion or ulnar flexion, okay? All right, so that's that. Now we are going to talk about the extensors. And once again, they have the exact action in the name, okay? Extensor carpi radialis longus, okay? ECRL, if you want to abbreviate that. Just make sure you get it correct. ECRL, okay? Extensor carpi radialis longus. It is shown best on the posterior view of the forearm, okay? And compared to the flexors, there is only one flexor carpi radialis. But for the extensors, there is an extensor carpi radialis longus and an extensor carpi radialis brevis, which we aren't asking you to learn, okay? But if there's a longus, there's probably a brevis. Brevis means it's short. Longus means it's long, okay? So right here we have the brachioradialis, and just one muscle just to the lateral side is the extensor carpi radialis longus, okay? Extends the wrist, and once again, helps with radial flexion, all right, or radial deviation, okay? Extensor digitorum, okay? So digitorum is referring to the digits, all right, referring to our fingers. So if we know it's an extensor and it's for the digitorum, it's going to help extend the digits, okay? So let's look at this guy here. We have to find the muscle that goes all the way to all the fingers here. We can do that. There we go. Huge muscle. We can see all the tendons that extend onto the fingers. What does extensor digitorum do? It's going to extend the digits. And that would be as if we're opening up our hand, okay, as we can see there. So extensor digitorum, opening up our hand. Perfect. Love it. Love it. Okay. And the last muscle we're asking you to learn is the extensor carpi ulnaris, okay? So once again, it's an extensor of the carpi, it extends the wrist, but it's on the ulnar side. So this guy is going to help us to ulnarly deviate, okay? So extensor carpi radialis longus, extensor digitorum, extensor carpi ulnaris, respectively, okay? So 5 muscles that we're asking you to know that move the wrist and hand, okay? Got some longer names, but the functions of them are all in the names, okay? The functions are all in the names. You guys got that. Boom. Easy. All right. So now we're going to move on to some of the muscles that act on the thigh and the hip, okay? So let's get back to our muscle view here. Let's go down to the hip here. Perfect. All right. A lot of muscles. We're going to talk about a select few of them, okay? So the ones that move the hip and the thigh, okay? So glute max, okay? This is actually the second strongest muscle in the body, believe it or not, okay? And the glute max is the huge glute muscle that we probably have all known, have all, worked out at some point once and another. You do not have power in your lower extremity without this guy because of how powerful and how strong it is, okay? Very strong muscle. Really, really important when it comes to sprinting, okay? Because it helps with extension of the thigh. So glute max, right here, excuse me, huge muscle, okay? Actions, ABD, which stands for abduction. Okay, so let's see what abduction looks like real quick. So if we're looking outwards, remember this is it, we're moving the leg further away from the midline, and that's what that guy helps us to do, okay? Abduction. So the way it pulls on the femur, it helps pull the leg further away from the midline. Okay, that's extension or abduction. Excuse me. Extension is remember, so flexion forward. All right. Extension goes backwards. All right. So if we're thinking about hip extension, looking from a lateral view here, we can see how that leg is moving in the posterior direction. Okay. So the glute max is responsible for abduction and also extension. So moving the leg backwards. All right. Glute max, one of the strongest muscles in the body, the second one, okay? Let's get back out of here. So glute max. So we have a max, we have another one called the gluteus medius, okay? That's the middle one. So glute max means it's large. Glute medius means it's right in the middle, all right? That guy can be seen best right here. So let's just hide the glute max here. And we can see the glute medius right here, okay? So this guy is right on the side. We know where it is in our buttock region. So the glute max is a little more posterior. A little more lateral is the glute medius. And this guy is just responsible for abduction of the thigh. Okay, so only muscle that abducts the thigh is the glute medius here, okay? All right, so glute medius, we have a glute minimus. We're not going to talk about it though, okay? It's actually hidden deep under this tensor fascia lata and also underneath the glute medius. Iliopsoas, okay? So, what this one is referring to, okay, it is the muscle, all right, that originates on the ilium, all right, the iliacus, all right? So the iliacus is one part of it. But then what's going to happen is I'm going to hide the sartorius here for just a second. I'm going to fade it. So see how this muscle here, the iliacus, and see how the psoas major, see how they start to kind of come down and combine into one muscle? So what's going to happen here is these muscles are both going to eventually combine, and they're going to insert on the lesser tubercle, all right, of the femur. And that's how they get their name called the iliopsoas, because it's the combination of both the iliacus and the psoas major, okay? Iliopsoas. So ilio is referring to the ilium, and psoas is referring to the lumbar spine. And this muscle, it is the prime mover. We'll take note of that. It is the prime mover of hip flexion, okay? Hip flexion. And we know what this one looks like, okay? Remember, flexion forward. Let's look at a quick video. Flexion forward, as we can see here. Moving forward with the hip, excuse me. And we can see both the iliacus here and also the psoas major as they come down to combine to form the iliopsoas as they help to flex the hip, flexion forward, okay? Just remember that this is the prime mover of flexion of the thigh, all right? Let's get out of this view here, perfect. So let's unfade these guys real quick. Perfect, yep, those are the only ones this guy here too, I think, yep. All right. Adductor longus, okay? So adductor, so it's a muscle that is going to adduct the hip, okay? Adductor longus means it's long, okay? There's one muscle right below it called the adductor magnus. Remember, magnus means it's the largest, all right? Remember, like the foramen magnum, it means it's the largest hole in the body. This is the largest adductor in the body, all right? The adductor magnus. Adductor longus is the longest adductor muscle, okay? So we can see that guy right here. Let's actually fade these ones. We'll talk about them in a second. Oh gosh, not isolate. Ah, get me out of that. Out, there we go. And fade, perfect. And we can see that adductor longus as it comes down, hides itself a little bit, but if you zoom in, it actually inserts itself on the medial thigh. So that way it allows us to be able to adduct, all right? And the main one that is the prime mover of adduction is the adductor magnus, which is just next to it. Let's see, there it is. Let's fade this gracilis here real quick. Because the adductor magnus is the largest. We can see it over here. Really large muscle. All right, comes down, inserts itself onto the medial thigh. We can see that, okay? All right, and then we can also see that in the pictures down here. All right. All right, gracilis, okay? Gracilis meaning long and slender, okay? It's a very long and slender muscle. Let's not fade it. But it is another medial thigh muscle, and it is one of the longer ones. Starts up at the top of the pubic bone, runs all the way down, and inserts itself at the medial tibia. This is a landmark down here called the pes anserine, means the duck's foot, okay? There's a collection of 3 different muscles that insert itself down there, that being the gracilis, the sartorius, which we'll talk about next, and also the semitendinosus, which we don't need to know, by the way. We don't need to know the origin and insertions of either of these muscles up here for the hip and the leg, okay? All right, but the last one here is called the sartorius, and this is the longest muscle in the body, okay? So sartorius means the tailor's muscle because this is how tailors would work. They would flex their thigh, so flexion forward, and they would flex their knee, and a function here that it's not listed is external rotation of the hip, okay? Or abduction of the hip too. So 2 hidden actions here, but the main 2 actions we want you to know are flexing the thigh and flexing the knee. The tailor's muscle, the longest muscle in the body, okay? All right, so flexion of the knee, we didn't show you that action yet. Let's just show you it really quick, okay? So compared to the other joints, all right, every other joint in the body in the anatomical position is flexion forward. Knee, though, it's the opposite. So at the knee, flexion does not go forward. The limb actually comes backwards, okay? So the limb comes backwards at the knee. It's the only joint in the body where this happens. So flexion forward for everything else, exception of the knee, right? Just make sure we take note of that. All right, so those are all the muscles there. Now we're going to talk about the quad muscle. So I'm going to start to hide some of these accessory muscles that we don't need here, just so we can better visualize what these quad muscles are looking like, okay? All right, perfect. Excellent. All right, perfect. So quad muscle, okay? So quadriceps. So sep is referring to head. Quad means 4. So this is the 4-headed muscle or collection of muscles in the body, okay? So the first one that we have here is the rectus femoris, okay? Sits right in the front. This means straight. Rectus means straight because it runs up and down, and it runs in the femoral region, which is why it's called the rectus femoris, okay? We do need to know its origin. It starts at the anterior ilium, okay? This is the ilium bone right here, as we know. So it starts in the anterior aspect of the ilium and it inserts itself down onto the tibial tuberosity. Okay. Now, while it's not visualized very well here, it's because when you get down here by the knee, you have the patella, but more importantly, the quad will eventually turn into what we know as the patellar ligament or the patellar tendon. The patellar tendon is what inserts itself down onto this tibial tuberosity. So sure, it's not specified here, but as the muscle comes down, muscles become tendons as they insert on the bones. And the one that it is best known for is the patellar tendon or patellar ligament, as it's specified here. Okay. All right, and the main function here is to extend the knee and flex the thigh. So we know what flexion of the thigh looks like, flexion forward. But extension of the knee, let's see if I can find that action here. That's hip. Let's see, where's knee? The extension, there we go. All right, so knee, remember, flexion is backwards at the knee. Extension at the knee is in the forward direction. So we're moving the limb into an anterior direction, okay? So we can see the quad muscles here. We can see them contracting. Perfect, so we're going back. And now as we're watching the action go through, we can see how the quads are shortening as the knee is extending, okay? All right, perfect, guys. So that's the first one. Vastus lateralis, okay? So vastus, what this is referring to are the muscles that are on the sides of the thigh, okay? Lateralis is named because it's on the lateral aspect of the thigh, okay? As we can see here. Insert or origin, okay, we need to know origin here. Origin, greater trochanter, as we can see that guy right up here. Origin there, inserts itself once again, it becomes the patellar tendon as it inserts itself onto the tibial tuberosity. All responsible for extension of the knee. Vastus medialis on the other side, the contralateral side, okay, is responsible for, once again, extension of the knee. Origin on the medial femur. Insertion, once again, tibial tuberosity, all right? And then the last one we didn't talk about here is actually one layer deep to the rectus femoris. So I'm going to hide it here quick. And that muscle is one layer deep, as you can see here. And that is called the vastus intermedius, okay? Because it is the muscle that is between both the vastus lateralis and the vastus medialis. So it's intermedius, okay? It helps extend the knee. We don't need to know the origin and insertion of this one, okay? Don't need to know it. It's not indicated, so don't worry about that. But what you should know is that all of the muscles of the quadricep help to extend the knee with the exception of the rectus femoris, as it has an accessory action, which is flexion of the thigh, flexion forward, okay? All right, hamstrings, okay? Let's see how many more muscles I got here. All right, we have a couple more, and then we're done. So, hamstrings, prime mover of knee flexion, okay? So these ones are found on the posterior aspect of the knee, or of the thigh. Posterior aspect. So the first one here is called the biceps femoris, okay? So we can see it here, the biceps. Biceps means two heads, kind of like the biceps brachii, okay? So it's a two-headed muscle, but it is in the femoral region. And we can see, this is the long head, right here's the short head, okay? Long head, short head. Let's hide this vastus lateralis here. So we can see the long head here, and then we can see the short head running just next to it. And they both have an origin, okay, at the ischial tuberosity. Remember, this is your sitting bone. This is the bony landmark that you're sitting on every time you're sitting. Probably right now what you're doing. You're sitting on your ischial tuberosity, okay? Originates up there, okay, as we can see all these muscular tendons coming off that ischium right back here. Right, as it's indicated. Perfect. And then it's going to come down and it's going to insert itself on the head of the fibula. All right. Remember, the head of the fibula is one of the two bones, of the lower leg. It is the lateral one. And the head of the fibula is named because it is the head. It's the most superior landmark of the fibula. Okay. So these guys flex the knee. We know what that looks like. Okay. And then we also know that it extends the thigh, so it pulls the thigh in the posterior direction, okay? And as you can already see with this relationship here, they all do the exact same function, all right? All the hamstrings have the exact same function, okay? All have the same function, and they all have the same origin, okay? Just take note of that. All right, so that's biceps femoris, the two-headed thigh muscle, okay? Two-headed thigh muscle. Next one. Semitendinosus, okay? So this is 1/2, okay? Because the semi-muscles are split in half. So we have one that's called the semitendinosus, one is called the semimembranosus, okay? The tendinosus is named so because it has a longer tendon compared to the semimembranosus, okay? So as we look at this muscle here, we can see how it has a much longer tendon compared to the semimembranosus, okay? It extends down just a little bit further, so it has a longer tendon, which is why it's called the semitendinosus, okay? Semimembranosus is called so because it has a larger muscle belly, okay? It looks a little bit larger compared to the semitendinosus, okay? So let's just scroll down here and take a look at that real quick, okay? So semitendinosus, we can see how that tendon comes down just a little bit further as it wraps itself around the anterior tibia. And the semimembranosus here, it's a little bit harder to see because it's hidden behind the semitendinosus, but it has a much larger muscle belly, okay? So that's why those two muscles are named respectively, all right? Semitendinosus, all right? Semimembranosus. One has a longer tendon here, all right? And the other one has a larger belly, respectively. Perfect. And then we do need to know the insertion of these guys, and they both insert themselves on the medial tibia, as we can see here, okay? So remember, we have that pes anserine bursa group down here, as it says, pes anserine bursa. We're not going to be really specific with it. We just want you to know that generally they insert on the medial aspect of the tibia, okay? All right, so 3 more muscles, guys. Let's end on a high note. We can do this, okay? So let's get out of these fancy views here. Let's go back. Look at the muscles around the knee, ankle, and foot. Let's see. Yeah, perfect. Excellent. All right, so the muscles that move the ankle and the foot, all right? Tibialis anterior. It's called that because it is the muscle that is on the anterior aspect of the tibia. So the tibia is right here. We can see there's a bunch of collection of muscles here. The one that is anterior to the tibia, though, is this guy, tibialis anterior, okay? What is this guy responsible for? We haven't talked about this action yet, but it is called dorsiflexion, okay? So dorsiflexion, when we're talking about the foot, we talk about it in terms of not posterior and anterior. We talk about it in terms of the dorsum, so the part of the foot that we can see when we're looking down at it from an eagle's eye view, and the plantar aspect, which the plantar is also known as the bottom of the foot, okay? So when we're dorsiflexing the foot, okay, what's happening is the dorsum, the back part of the foot is moving upwards, okay, upwards towards the sky. Plantar flexion, okay, is when we are pushing on the gas pedal, okay? So we're moving the plantar aspect of the foot down down towards the ground. So like I said, we're pushing on the gas pedal, okay? So we're pointing our toes, all right? So that's the difference between dorsi and plantar flexion, okay? So the tibialis anterior is responsible for dorsiflexion here. So let's highlight it, zoom out. We can see that when it is contracting, we can see that the toes, the dorsum of the foot is going up towards the sky, okay? So that's what that guy is primarily responsible for. The gastrocnemius, okay? This is primarily known as our calf muscle. Let's get out of this view here, perfect. Go back one more. Come on, there we go. All right, so this is on the posterior aspect of the lower leg. So we scroll back around here. We can see that. 2 muscles right here, okay? We have a medial head and we have a lateral head. We don't need to know the logistics of that, but just know that this is commonly known as the calf muscle, okay? The gastrocnemius, all right? They have an origin, all right? The origin is on the medial, or is on the femoral condyle. So remember, we have a medial and a lateral one. And since we have 2 heads of the gastroc, the medial one originates on the medial femoral condyle, and the lateral one originates on the lateral femoral condyle, okay? They insert down onto the calcaneus, the heel bone, okay? This muscle will eventually become what we know as the Achilles tendon, okay? Because as we know, muscle eventually will turn into tendon as it inserts to bone. And the big tendon that we know, and we've probably seen a lot of Achilles ruptures with it, Kevin Durant, Aaron Rodgers, Kirk Cousins. This is that big tendon that they're tearing, is the Achilles tendon, okay? So, gastrocnemius, the calf muscles, origin femoral condyles, insertion on the calcaneus via the Achilles tendon. And the action of this guy is to plantar flex the foot, so to push on the gas pedal, okay? And the last one, which is just 1 layer deep to it, okay? And if we were to look at the left side here, we can see that guy. This is called the soleus, okay? So the soleus is a part of the triceps surae group, which is a collection of muscles that help to plantar flex the foot, okay? The gastrocnemius is a part of it. The soleus is one layer deep to the gastrocnemius. So if I were to take the gastroc, if I were to hide the Achilles tendon here, we can see the soleus, okay? So we don't need to know an origin and insertion here. All we got to know is that it once again helps to plantar flex the foot, okay? So we have a good collection of muscles that plantar flex the foot, all right? And then on our models here in the book, we can see all of these muscles here, okay? You can see the adductors, the gracilis, all right? You can see the sartorius, you can see the iliopsoas as it comes down. Remember, they combine into one muscle here as they insert onto the lesser trochanter, all right? And then, of course, we can see all the quads, see the calves, gastrocnemius, soleus, and then we can also see the tibialis anterior in the front, okay? All right, and besides that, guys, we have labeling here down. We have labeling for you guys. And then, of course, we have our review section. And that's everything for muscles, guys, okay? So, like I said, once again, this is just a small fraction of these muscles, okay, that we're talking about here, all right? A small fraction of them. Now, I know you guys are smart enough to do all this stuff and know all this stuff, so I think you guys are really going to get this, especially for those ex-science majors. This should resonate with you a ton, especially, okay? But much like everything else, bite the whale, like I've been saying, okay? Bite that whale. Take little bites of this stuff. It's a lot, but I know with time and effort, you guys are going to be just fine, okay? Take the time that you need to study this stuff, all right? Okay, so that is muscle anatomy, okay? Part 2. We got that guy done. Lab 9 is muscle physiology. Not sure how big of a video I'm gonna make on that because a lot of the things that we're doing are experiments that we have in class, but just in case you guys want a review on this stuff, I'm more than happy to do that, okay? All right, well, guys, that's it for muscle anatomy. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I know I did. This is what I do every day. So I really enjoy going through this. I hope you guys learned something with this. Besides that, study up, and then I will see you guys back in class for our next celebration. All right, see you guys later. TK
Out.